Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by T&K Hunting Gear. If you haven't heard about T&K, then it's about time you do. I've been using T&K gear out in the field and on hunts and have fallen in love with their stuff. T&K is veteran-owned and 100% made in America using only American-made products. All their gear is covered under a lifetime warranty with no questions asked. If it breaks or fails, they will fix it or replace it for free. T&K is your resource for bino harnesses, bow slings, and a lot more amazing gear. For more information about T&K hunting gear, go to tnkhunting.com or search for them on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Freedom on and stay soulful. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I am really excited about this toy drive that we are putting on here with Washington Backcountry and the Soulful Hunter Podcast. What we are doing is collecting money to then donate to Seattle Children's Hospital so that they can buy the toys. Because of coronavirus this year, they are not accepting direct toy donations, and we are unable to have our social event like we have in years past. So there is a link in the show notes. There's also a link in our social media profiles, and you can go to our website to donate as well. It is a GoFundMe account for Seattle Children's Hospital Toy Drive. We have a goal of $25,000, which is incredible. There's also going to be incredible no matter how much money we raise. We are just shy of $3,000. This fundraiser ends December 11th, and anything that you can give is going to be a blessing. Remember, you can't outgive good, and also one cool thing is that even if you can't give, if you can share the link with your social networks, that would be super beneficial in helping the kids at Seattle Children's Hospital. Thank you so much for tuning in this episode. I'm Johnny Mack. Be blessed, everybody. Have a great day, and stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today I got a killer episode for all of you who are people with children. We, as you've listened to this podcast and you've heard me tell my stories, and I've had my wife on, we've talked about our 3 children that we have. I'm sure a lot of you who are parents have really tried to figure out how to balance hunting and your passion for the outdoors and wild with family time and responsibilities and passion and purpose and all of those cool things. And so today's guest is not only a awesome hunter and an advocate for the outdoors and wildlife, it is also a mother. And we have Kate Small on once again. And if you listen to the episode with Dennis Stokes where we introduced the Invictus frame for the initial scent backpacks, she was also a guest as she was one of the beta testers for the Invictus frame, and she got to put it to use on a giant moose in Idaho. So we might get to hear a little bit about that. But Kate, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back on.
Yeah, it's always a good time here at the Soulful Hunter where we keep it real nice. So, Kate, how many children do you have?
I have one 2-year-old daughter, and then we have another one on the way due in April.
Congratulations. That is
Thank
so
you.
awesome. So, before we really dive into all this, tell the listeners who you are, how you're involved in hunting, and kind of a little bit of your background, when you started and all that.
So I'm based in Idaho. I live here with my husband and 2-year-old. We actually just moved to Eastern Idaho. I'm a registered nurse. I am on the board for the Foundation for Wildlife Management, which is basically a wolf management program here in Idaho, because we're one of the lucky states that can hunt and trap them. And I started hunting when I was 19. No one in my family hunted. I didn't know much about it, but my mom married my stepdad, and he was a big hunter, and I'd been interested in it, and he was kind enough to let me go along with him. And it just became a huge bonding experience for us, and we go at least once a year even now, and he really got me into it. And then it just progressed from there, and now my husband and I mostly do just backcountry hunts, and but I just love it, and that's all thanks to my stepdad. So
That is so cool. So at 19 years old, you had like this call of the wild upon your soul, and it it just were how I don't know how do you breach that topic with your stepdad, and it's like I think I want to try to hunt or
well, yeah, I mean, he so growing up from the time I was 2, I played sports, and sports were my life, and then graduated high school, played a little bit in college, but, there was that void, there's no I was missing all athleticism in my life and competitiveness, and I had always loved the outdoors, just had never hunted, and never had a mentor to show me, and then he hunted and he'd bring home animals, and I also love blood and guts and anatomy, and so I'd, go out when he was skinning them and, butchering them, and I was so excited, and he was more than willing to take me out, and,
at this point in your life, did you know you wanted to be a nurse already?
yeah, yes, I knew I wanted to be a nurse. I hadn't quite started nursing school yet.
Okay, so the blood and guts, the anatomy, like that was just naturally in you. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
weird. The animals have the exact same anatomy as humans. It changed.
I loved it. So, and I think he was pretty excited about that because my mom's completely opposite and hates blood, gore, dead animals. So it was it was nice for him, I think.
That is so cool. So here you are, 19 years old. You're getting into this. You're hands on. What was the first hunt that you went on that you took an animal and you were like, dude, this is
Uh,
this is it.
it was well, I honestly I hunted with him and I always had limited time because I was a student. And so I'd go with him when I could. And I hunted with him probably a year or 2 before I ever tagged out on anything, but I just loved being out there with him. It was just, he I was learning about him, he was learning about me, and then you get to experience what you won't experience with anyone else on any other occasion aside from hunting and being in the outdoors.
Right.
And so, but finally I got, I think, my first animal. I took a grouse, which was super exciting, but my first big game
It
animal,
always is.
it is. I know. I was like, yes. Was a mule deer, and it was probably the tiniest mule deer you've ever seen in your life, and I loved it. I was so excited, and just the whole process. And not only was I think he was more excited than I was. When you get
Right.
to see someone take an animal and you're just pumped for them. And so after that, then I think it was pretty consistent of us tagging out, but it took a little bit to get first blood, but it didn't deter me at all because it was more just being out there with family.
That's so cool. Here on the podcast, we're always talking about community. And one of the biggest things of why I got into hunting and why I started Washington Backcountry, which is mentorship is conservation. And then on the Soulful Hunter podcast, it's all about transforming lives through primal adventure, is that community aspect of just being around people that love to do what you love to do. And it is the energy is contagious and it just flows and it's so much fun to talk about and experience. So that's really awesome. Were you a rifle hunter when you first got into it, and do you archery hunt or
So I was a rifle hunter, and this year, this late archery season will be my first season bow hunting.
cool?
So I'm excited.
That is so awesome. You're gonna love it. And shooting an animal with a bow is a completely different experience. It is so wild. I
That's what I hear. My husband is a bow hunter, and that's what he says. He's like, "You're gonna be addicted." So,
I am going on. So when we record this, it might not be released right afterwards, but I'm going on archery elk hunt right after Thanksgiving.
oh,
And
where
Western
in one?
Washington, yep. So Roosevelt elk, and it is 3-pointer better, but I also drew cow tag. So it's whatever I can do. But if I shoot an elk, or when I shoot an elk, I'm gonna have to buy another freezer because right now I've done pretty good this year and been blessed enough to tag out on two bears and a deer so far, and so
It's a good problem to have.
right, 100%. And you know what? It's so nice not having to buy red meat in the store.
Yeah. It
And
it saves a lot of money too.
yes. Totally. Okay, so let's get into the motherhood aspect and hunting and what it's like. So, here you are, you have already been hunting for quite some time. You get into a relationship, turns into a marriage, you have your first kid. What was it like balancing or even not balancing? I don't know, you talk, you explain it. What was it like having a passion for hunting in the outdoors, but then, and I'm going to use the word stifled, okay? Having it stifled by having a child, which is one of the most special, magical um, moments that one person can ever have in a lifetime is to experience the birth of their own children. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such a big question. Like unpack it as much as you can.
So my husband and I are both avid hunters, and that's our main hobby. It's all we're doing when we aren't working. And so throwing a kid in the mix um, was extremely difficult. Um, we lived in the Treasure Valley beforehand, and we really didn't have family there that you can be like, hey, can you watch the baby? So I think we did pretty good. We were like, we're not going to stop hunting. Where it's just going to be a little bit harder. And so we would drive. My parents live in Klamath Falls, Oregon. So it's about 7 hours away from where we were. And we'd drive all the way there just to drop her off so we could drive all the way back and then 6 hours more to go hunting.
Wow.
And we were doing some crazy things, which now I'm always so tired. I'm like, I don't know how we, we ever did that. But we drove one day, I think it was like 18 hours straight just to get where we were going to hunt after dropping her off. And then, but if you love something enough, you're going to make time for it. And it was easier when she was younger and didn't really know what was going on. But now that she can talk and say, like, I miss you, I love you, and like, don't go. And you're just like, oh, and just heartbroken. It's getting harder, I think. Because we can do those long drives and we'll make it work. The drives are getting harder on her, and it's heartbreaking to us because you don't want to leave your kid and have them so upset, and they don't understand that, oh, we'll be back in a couple of days. And but it's really important to us that we keep hunting because it's something we love. So we don't want to give up a part of ourselves that may be very selfish, but we also, as she gets older, will be taking her with us more and more. And so hopefully she loves it just as much as we do, and we
Right.
can incorporate the morals and values that come with hunting because there are ethics and everything involved, respecting nature that goes along with hunting that we want to teach her.
Man, that is so cool to hear. So I used to work at REI, and I remember I was doing what was it? I was doing one of the sections of the Pacific Crest Trail here in the state of Washington. And on day one, I set out and I was probably about 10 miles in, and I passed a couple who had a brand new, like, well, under a year old baby, and they are carrying it in one of the Osprey, like, child carrier backpacks. And I was like, you guys are a long ways away from the trailhead. And they're like, oh, yeah, we've been out here for a couple days. I'm like, with your with your baby? They're like, oh yeah, you just kind of figure it out and it works and it has its disadvantages, but it doesn't stop us from doing what we love and we want to incorporate it with our child. And I was like, that is so awesome and very inspiring. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to have this episode with you is to inspire all the new parents and all the people who are going to be parents or want to be parents, or even if they're getting into hunting and they have children already, and like it's tough. It is
It
really
is.
hard.
It's so hard, and I don't know, you probably have more insight on what it's like, because we're just about to throw a second one into the mix. So far, we've only had to deal with one. You have three, right?
Right.
So I can't even imagine what that's like.
Yeah, for us, it was really hard. Number one, my wife, she just recently this year passed her hunter safety. So before that, she's never hunted. But the biggest, most difficult thing was for her is like, my wife is also an RN, and being a professional, she decided to work in the school district so that we could have weekends off together rather than she was working every other weekend, and then you only have 2 weekends a month. And how do you fit that in? And needless to say, she's like, I work all week long, and then here you are wanting to take off to go hunt, and then it's full on kid duty for me. So there's this, and I'm not hiding it at all, and I don't want people to think like it's some mystery of like my marriage or whatever, but communication and respecting your partner is going to be one of the healthiest and most beneficial things for your marriage, for your children, and for your passion of hunting. Because
Yeah.
without that, oh man, I mean, my wife, bless her heart, Megan, if you're listening, I love you. You're amazing, and I'm so grateful for you. Um, and with that, it's hard. It is.
It is. It's really hard. And I think I've been putting off doing archery because he does archery, and that way I can say, okay, I'll stay home with the kids. You go during archery season, and then during rifle season, we'll just try and find, whatever babysitter we can, and we'll just go out for a little bit. I mean, we're not grabbing people off the street, but it's come close.
That's funny. So there was last year, last summer, I had my third child, my third boy, and I'm so grateful and blessed. And I was like, oh, August bear is coming up. I really, it's like bear's been my thing. I've killed more bears than any other animal, and it rolls around, and she's like, I'm like, okay, okay. September elk. And all of a sudden it rolls around, and she's like, I just can't do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. October rifle deer, and no, that one still didn't happen. But the point that I really want to drive home to all my listeners is that I always talk about you can't outgive good. When you are putting your priorities straight and making sure that you are loving people and putting good out into the world, things will always come around. And last year in November, finally she blessed me enough to say, "Okay, I think I'm pretty good. Feel free to go." And I was able to go get our Christmas turkey, and I shot my very first buck last November.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I was like, "Oh, God is good. Megan, thank you so much for blessing me and blessing this family." And but it just goes to show, like, I could have been an absolute dick to my wife and be like, "No,
Yeah.
I'm hunting. No, I'm doing this. This is something I've been waiting for all year long." And I'm sure that there's people out there that do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes both ways. Like, being a wife and a mother, you can get overwhelmed and be like, and there's kind of that like you're missing out factor, and like he's getting to go off and do something fun, and I'm here with the kids, and you have three, so that's a lot harder, to wrangle three children by yourself. But I think it goes both ways, where your partner has to be giving in some instances as well, and say, you know what, I know you love to do this. And I have friends that have wives that say, like, never let them go hunting, and
Yeah.
it just drives a wedge between them, because you can't tell someone, no, you can't do what you love, and expect them to be okay with it for years and years. You guys just had a kid, completely understandable.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, like, even this, I'm doing April, and that's right when spring bear starts. And Justin's like, well, I think if I can go like right in, and I'm like, that's
Justin,
3 days after I'm due. So
right. Come on,
maybe
bro.
let's hold on.
Where's your husband? Get him on this podcast right
I
now.
know. It's like, give it a week and then maybe we'll talk. But
And that's even if you're in the correct headspace after giving birth. Like
yeah.
there's so much that one kid, you're like, whoa, this is brand new. Okay, I think I can handle it. And then two kids, you're like, oh man, I also have to take care of this one and help this one survive. And then you just keep adding them on, and it's like, holy
Oh,
moly.
I know. I'm nervous. Every day I'm like, oh, why are we doing this again? you know,
Well,
I'm excited, but it's like, oh, it's a lot.
man, I totally hear you, and I'll tell you this: God never gives you more than you can handle. And
Yes, you
and
are right.
I went through a leadership course, and they were talking about. They're like, okay, we're going to use the term stretch. So everyone says, oh, I got too much on my plate. I can't, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this. And they're like, no, you do. You're going to learn how to stretch, and you're going to learn how to stretch your plate and make it larger. And I want to equate this for all you parents out there where you don't know how much you can love until you have a child, and then your heart just stretches and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know I had that in me. The same thing goes to communication about hunting, communication about loving your spouse, loving your partner, loving your children, is that you have the ability to stretch. And we are not confined by some little box that our head, our inner voice says, you can't do that, or that's not going to work. Or now, when I say stretch, remember, I'm not just talking about stretching so you can hunt. I'm also speaking specifically towards stretching your limits and your perspective so that you are a better husband, a better wife, a better father, a better mother, a better employee, whatever it is. Because there's a lot of times that people are like, oh, I'm at the end of my end of my wick or end of the rope, and it's like, take a deep breath. You're not dead. You have money in the bank. You have a skill set that can get you food if you need to. You have a roof over your head. Take a breath, collect yourself, and then decide what you want to do.
Yeah, and look at all the good things you have, and this too shall pass, and you can
Absolutely.
get through everything.
Yes.
And that's yeah, I think it's a lot of, with marriage and hunting and kids, it's a lot of give and take, but you do have to find time for yourself and like you said, communicate that with your spouse. And then with kids, now that she's 2, so this year I had 2 days for an elk hunt, and we took her with us. We just moved to a new town. We don't know anyone. We're even further from family now. And she's at that age where we could kind of bring her. We couldn't go full on backcountry, but we could take her out and do some glassing, and she was so happy. She loves being outside. And so we would just say, oh, we have to be sneaky, sneaky. We're looking. And everything, she just like screamed, deer. and, so needless to say, I did not get an elk, but it honestly was one of my most fun hunts because it made my heart so happy watching her grab the binoculars from me and hold them up and like try to do whatever her dad was doing. And then she had like a reed in her mouth and grabbed the bugle tube and is trying to bugle. And
Yes.
so it was just so neat getting to see that. And so I'd give up every hunt if she could come and just participate like that because it was just amazing.
That's so cool. And you know what? My children have a very good eye for animals now. And it's only gonna like serve them in the
It's
future.
only gonna get better. It really is. And so yeah, I mean it's hard when they're little, but you have to think, one day this little person is gonna grow up and have a tag in their pocket and you'll get to be there with, their first harvest.
Yeah.
And my stepdad always says to me, which I just love, he always says, I was there for your first kill and I hope you're there for my last. And that like
Oh
it's
man.
it's just like, yes, like that's why I want with my kids too.
Talk about the circle of life right there. Like, oh my
It's
God, that's a
so true.
tear jerker. I don't know how
I
you're
know.
not
I'm
just
like,
bawling your eyes out right now just talking about that.
and that's just, you read stories online about kids that have been hunting with their granddads and then they took him out on his last hunt. And hunting's just so much more than getting an animal. It really is. It really is. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people who don't hunt
Well,
don't understand
well,
that.
and that is one of the missions that I have here at the Soulful Hunter is to like reinvent and reimagine the way hunting is thought of and the way it's talked about and the way it's experienced. Um, my good buddy Tony, my hunting partner, he and I had just a phenomenal hunting trip this last weekend. Obviously, we took some animals, which was a bonus, but the 6 hour drive to and the 6 hour drive back was probably one of the most beneficial conversations of our lives. And like no joke, that is still the hunting trip. Like that is you going hunting. It's about those experiences and going back. It's the community. And I'm a believer that iron sharpens iron. So the countenance of one friend to another. And so if you are not around each other, trying to sharpen each other, trying to make each other better, working on, you know, my father, he always said, either you're getting better or you're getting worse. And I like to apply that to not just, he used that in sports analogy, but I like to use that in my analogy for life. Either I'm getting better as a husband, getting better as a father, getting better as a businessman, getting better as a hunter. Like my goal, I always talk about, I want to identify what I want. I want to be a great hunter. And that is my ultimate goal when it comes to my hunting career is that I want to, not for fame, that has nothing to do with it. It's because I got started late in the game and everything I've earned on my own. And I'm like, okay, I want this. But it makes it so much more special and it leads to conversations like this.
It's so true. I mean, most of my time on the mountain, there's always been at least one just like solid conversation, and you go home and you're like, that was a good time. I don't care what the rest, the weather might have been awful, we might not have seen anything, but that one conversation was worth it. And I've actually met guys for the first time up on the mountain, and we'll just like with my husband and we'll hunt the week together, and now they're lifelong friends. And it's crazy how that happens. And the mountain just changes you, and hunting together just changes you.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about, and this got brought up to by my good buddy Tyler Nelson. Tyler, if you're listening, you are always on my mind, and I'm thinking about you, and you impact me in this podcast. So Tyler is a newer parent, and he actually didn't even know I was doing this podcast. But one of the things that he talked about is he was like, "Dude, social media is difficult because there is that envy factor that can arise where maybe it's like you well, on a couple podcasts ago I talked about Theodore Roosevelt quote, and he said comparison is the thief of joy.
Mhm.
And so as a parent who's potentially missing hunting, which is their passion, and then you look at social media and you're like, oh man, look at what these people are accomplishing and I'm not, and I'm stuck here and all this stuff. As a parent, do you ever experience that? And also, what do you do when you are feeling like that?
I 100%. I mean, I think everyone does. I definitely do. You're laying in bed or your kids screaming, you're on Instagram and you're like, "Oh man, they're out hunting and I'm not." And I always say, the more you're out, the more successful you're going to be. And I hate being inside the house not doing anything when I have a tag in my pocket. I just hate it.
Yep.
But you just can't compare the two really. You're at home with your kids and that's a blessing, you know. And that person that's out hunting might not have kids, and that might be the only thing they want in life.
Yeah.
So everything's the grass is greener on the other side, and it always is. It always is. Social media makes it really hard because everything looks so perfect and easy and good. And even when you see people in 3 feet of snow, you're like, oh, I wish I were there. And they're probably out there like, gosh, I'd rather be home right now because it's freezing and I'm uncomfortable. And so it's so hard. And I have to work at it all the time not to compare myself and like get, that fear of missing out, that jealousy of not being out there or seeing other people out there. And I know when I'm out on the mountains, all I'm doing is thinking about my daughter. And so you're like torn in these places, and people can't see that over Instagram. That I'm just like, oh, at night when we're out in the backcountry, we're every night we lay in our bags and we just talk about like our daughter. We go through videos and photos of her because we miss her so much. And you give up a lot to go out and hunt because you miss your kids, but it's worth it at certain times.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And you know what's really interesting is I feel like when you're at home, you're always thinking, at least for me, you're always thinking about, oh man, I can't wait till I'm out in the field. And then when you're out in the field, you're like, I really miss my kids and my wife. And then like,
It's so true.
and the weather sets in, and you're like, this sucks. I want to go home. But you're like, wait a minute, no, I've been wanting to do this for the longest time. Like, it is a mind trip. It's so weird. And once again, like the grass is always greener on the other side. And so it's important to identify what it is that you want out of life. Because if you never identify what you want, it's like shooting at a target without knowing where your target is. You just kind of
It's
closing your eyes and letting it rip.
it's so true. And just I think the best advice I can give is no matter where you are, be in the moment. If you're at home with your kids and it's a rough night, they're running around screaming, crying, enjoy that because it's not going to last forever. And
Yeah.
then when you're out on the mountain, enjoy that because you only get so many trips that you're
Yes.
able to go out on the mountain.
And
So, and it's hard to train yourself to do that, but
so adding on to that, and I'm having a little bit of a fuzz issue. I apologize, listeners, to those of you who can hear that. Um, is you only get so many moments on the mountain, right? So don't wish your life away. Once again, be present. Is like, yes, you might miss this moment out on the mountain, but you're never going to get this time back with your children. And the
Mhm.
moment that you look at a picture of when they were a baby and now they're 2 years old, 4 years old, 6 years old, and you're like, where did this time go? It really puts you in a place of reflection. And we always talk about on this podcast, inward reflection leads to outward correction. And so to stop and pause and be still and to reflect upon your life and what you want out of it, you're never going to be disappointed. So
It's true.
any advice for any new parents out there who are hunters or want to be hunters with children or soon to be?
Um, do it because it's so important as important as it is to take care of that new baby or, new child, it's just as important to take care of yourself. And if you're unhappy, you can't make that child happy.
Yeah.
And so do it. Obviously, there's time constraints, money constraints, if you don't have a babysitter, but do what you can to get out there and eventually you can start bringing your kids out there. I mean, we're taking our 2-year-old this year. We're going to have a baby during spring bear, and I'm already planning on how I can bring that kid to sit the baits with me while Justin takes our 2-year-old, and so
That's so
it goes off
cool.
with her. So I mean, you can do it. It looks hard or sounds hard, but really you can do anything you want to do.
You know,
It's just
I
a matter
totally,
of doing.
it's the American dream. Like you literally, if there's a will, there's a way. You put your mind to it. One of the things that I found very fascinating, which was one of my good buddies, Doug, he took his kids shooting for the very first time. And I was like, how'd it go? He goes, it went great. I had to reevaluate what I wanted to get out of it. And I had to remember it's not about me, it's about them. So maybe if you are taking your kids hunting or you're wanting to, remember you leave a sour taste in their mouth about it, and they're never going to want to join you again. And so put it about them, make it about them, and then together you guys will have the time of your life.
It's so true, and we had to check ourselves on that when we took Finley out the first time elk hunting with us, and she's, excited and screaming at all the birds or the deer she was seeing, and we were like, "Shh, you have to be quiet," and then we realized we're being a little harsh on this two-year-old who is
Right.
just excited to be outside, and we need to be like, "Yeah, that's awesome, but try and be," you have to change your tone, and it's hard to do that. As far as you said your friend took his kids out shooting. We've been taking her out shooting since she was really little. And I think it's so important because she's really good about keeping her protective hearing gear on, which is amazing for a kid that young. But we also it's early learning about gun safety, and we're always very conscious to be, even though she probably doesn't understand, we're like, don't point this at anyone. We don't let her hold it, but just so she
Yeah.
watches mom and dad. And you always stay back here, you never go in front of this. And so I think it's as early as you can get them out there. If that's something you're going to be doing, the better.
Yes. I'm actually, while we are talking, I'm pulling up a couple books, which, since Christmas is coming up, there are some really good books for young children that I bought for my kids, and I love to read to them. There's a few, the author is Robert Jacobs, and they are illustrated really nicely. One is my first BB gun, the other is my first bow, one is my first rifle, and then there's also these little Jake books, like Little Jake and the Record Bass, and Little Jake Hunts Alaska, and all this stuff. But it's with these books, it's talking about gun safety. Like, Grandpa got me my very first handed got my first rifle, and he said, never touch it unless there's an adult around, and all this stuff. And so my kids are learning this gun safety, and never dry fire a bow because you can break it. And my little, well, he's 4 now from last month, but my little boy, he's always like, yeah, Dad, remember? And I'm like,
That's
yes.
awesome. That's huge, though. It's so big to teach them young and get them out there, get them excited, but make sure, they're safe. And also they're watching you, and always remember that is little eyes and they're little sponges, and they are watching and learning everything you do. And, be safe, be ethical, always have a good attitude, and then that'll be passed on to them.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add a couple things to this because it just came to my mind. I am a national archery and schools instructor. I brought archery into my middle school and I've been teaching it. And a part of that program is always talking in the positive. So instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, say, why don't you try to do this? Why don't you try to do this? And it is a great way to encourage and foster the creativity and ownership of something rather than being restricted by everything. And so I really love what you say, how they are always watching. And it's not just about gun safety and about hunting. As a parent, your children are always watching and listening, and it is very important to set a good example for them.
Absolutely.
I love it.
And it makes you a better person because you're like, oh, I shouldn't do that because this little minion's watching me right now and they're going to do the exact same thing and I don't want them doing it.
Right. Nothing like built-in accountability.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Well, Kate, this has been an awesome episode, and I hope a lot of people reach out, or if they have questions and all that. We wish you the best of luck and best of all the blessings in the world in your future endeavors with hunting and children, but also in your upcoming second kid that's coming, and I'm
Oh
super
gosh.
excited. So. Where can listeners get a hold of you at, or reach and follow you, or all that?
I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Kate Small Outdoors.
I love it. And we'll make sure we add that into the show notes, as well as maybe a couple of these book links that we were talking about on here. So Kate, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a great ambassador and advocate for hunting and being a great example of what it's like to balance your passions and also balance your purpose in life. And so really proud of you. I'm honored to have you on as a guest, and I look forward to hunting wolves with you sometime in Idaho.
Yes.
And then also,
Anytime.
yeah, let's do it. And then also just connecting with you and always staying in contact. So thank you so much for being a guest, and just be blessed. And as always, stay soulful out there.
Thank
I love
you.
it. All right, listeners, go give Kate a follow. Go give her congrats on the baby and all that good stuff. Thank you for listening to this episode. I'm Johnny Mack. As always, stay soulful, everybody. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast, as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.